I would always, it seemed to be like once every few weeks I would smell garbage burning at his house.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. It hasn't taken long for investigators to state the obvious. Heuermann's house was likely the scene in at least one murder. We also know, according to CBS News, that Heuermann's wife and two adult children were away at the time of the alleged murders. While I think it's logical to assume the killer would strike when his family who live with him were out of town, it's not necessarily logical that this correlation would extend all the way to the house being the crime scene, certainly not in every instance. I mean, another possibility is that he used his vehicle or even a boat. But that's not to say that the house couldn't have been used at least once. It would certainly explain Heuermann's unusual rootedness to the property. If we are dealing with sexual and sadistic crimes, then we have a killer that wants to take his time with the victims and savor the experience.
You can't savor all the little emotions.
But before we get to the rest of this episode, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Welcome to the thousands of you who have subscribed. Bear in mind, I'll be doing a second episode on the number 2 clue we've all missed, and also want to deal with the motive, so keep sending in your suggestions. So far I still haven't seen what I'm thinking. If you're finding this episode interesting, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button, and let's get started. So we were talking about this idea of someone who wants to savor a particular experience, and obviously we're talking about quite a sick scenario here. But in that sense, in order to make that possible, you would imagine someone who would need a familiar space. According to CBS News, quote, a Chevrolet Avalanche truck, which is believed to be connected to the suspect and which may have been used in at least one of the murders, was recovered in South Carolina and transported to Suffolk County. Investigators in Long Island are expected to probe the truck for possible evidence related to the crimes. Heuermann lived for decades in a house just across a bay from where the remains were discovered. While probing the suspect's home since his arrest, this is according to the article on CBS News, police have been seen carrying various items from the property, including guns, including a filing cabinet, including a computer, including a large doll inside a glass case, and a strange painting of a woman who seems to have bruises under her eyes. Now, in a very basic sense, how many people do you know that have lived in the same place for decades? Do you agree that it tends to be fairly unusual nowadays? Meanwhile, let me ask you a question. Do you agree that Scott Peterson very nearly got away with the murder of Lacey Peterson? Now, can you imagine if Scott Peterson murdered a prostitute and took her out in his boat and dumped her in San Francisco Bay? Would they have caught him then? Would they have known it was him? I've written 2 books on Scott Peterson, a case that played out in December 2002. By the way, I'll put the links to those books in the description. Did the Scott Peterson case, which preceded some of the murders, did that give the Gilgo Beach killer any ideas? And the reason I ask is because of this idea of using the sole idea of going out on a boat. In Scott Peterson's case, it was to go fishing as a cover for some other nefarious activity. And in this sense, the Fox News have put out a really interesting article. They've really done some pretty good investigative work. They've tested a theory by literally going out in the field, riding a boat and timing the distance. And so they've written an article, I'll put a link to that in the description. Suspected Long Island serial killers duck hunting could have been perfect cover for hiding bodies. Well, exactly. According to the article, quote, prosecutors declined to comment Wednesday on whether they believe the victims were driven to the area over the bridge to Ocean Parkway, but the bay side of the beach is almost directly south of a boat ramp close to Heuermann's home. Now, I think it's possibly, or probably even, not a case of did he drive or did he go by boat. In other words, I don't think it's a question of this or that. I would imagine if someone has committed multiple crimes, they wouldn't commit it every single time in the exact same way. So depending on the number of crimes, you would imagine that sometimes a boat was used and sometimes a vehicle was used. It's a trickier question than you might suppose, because as much as a vehicle may stand out on a lonely stretch of beach road, and also a vehicle would stand out, they were saying that there's not like a shoulder, and so if a vehicle does go off the road, people would definitely notice that. And you would be spending a certain length of time in that area. But then by the same token, a boat crossing an open stretch of water would also stand out. The difference, of course, is if the boat is pretending to be there for a good reason, such as duck hunting. The other thing, and I must say thank you to You Know Who You Are, someone who's a local in the area sent me footage of the area at night, and it is pitch dark. And so given the profile we've put together so far, we have reason to believe we are dealing with someone who would want to mask what he was doing under a surface of plausible deniability. And so I think this whole duck hunting thing is absolutely likely. But I think on top of that, he would want to mask that under the cover of darkness. According to Fox News, quote, and this is really important, Heuermann was an avid duck hunter, not just a duck hunter, someone who was very enthusiastic about it. And to the extent that he shared a duck boat with a friend, and that is according to the attorney for his wife, who filed for divorce Wednesday. And you kind of get the idea that the reporter who spoke to this attorney heard from his wife this idea, and that is where it actually came from, which is, if you think about it, it's almost like coming from ground zero. It's coming from, it seems, a person very, very close to the center of things. So what we're dealing with here is someone who had the means, the opportunity, and the plausible deniability narrative all working for him. According to Fox News, quote, Heuermann's green Chevrolet Avalanche, which he owned at the time of the murders between 2007 and 2010, showed that it had a tow hitch and trailer ball. So that's additional information, additional potential evidence. And then this is the incredible work that Fox News Digital did. We saw something similar to that in the Brian Laundrie case. They followed a channel cutting across South Oyster Bay from Amityville and running straight to the backside of Gilgo Beach. And they found a sandy bank less than 50 yards from where the police found one of the Gilgo 4 in December 2010. I must say, when I read that and I think about a comment I received, someone said, wow, your coverage of the submersible tragedy is really good, but you're really a liability when it comes to this particular case. You've actually got someone getting this information, a reporter, and then checking it out in terms of the possible route and finding that it really did make sense. Meanwhile, when I was making the case that the fabric of the Amityville case, and this is a channel cutting across from South Oyster Bay from Amityville, they were saying, you're a liability to true crime because you don't really know what you're talking about. I just find it an incredibly insulting comment to make. I mean, well done, just in terms of you did really well to be incredibly, incredibly insulting. But anyway, I guess it needs to be water off a duck's back. So this investigative journalist went to test this out in practice. And they made the journey by boat Wednesday morning. This is the Fox News Digital team. Took about 5 minutes to get from the north end of South Oyster Bay, that's in the Amityville area, to the far south, to the beach. And then 5 to 10 additional minutes, according to Fox News, in the no-wake zones on either end. They also then, and this is so thorough and so good to see, they then drove the route, and they found that driving there down Wantagh Parkway over the bridge took about the same amount of time, 25 minutes as well. So if the time it takes by boat is similar to the time it takes by car, you can see how it's not much of a muchness that the killer could use one of these options or both whenever it suited him. Personally, I think it's more risky carrying a dead body in a vehicle, where you can be stopped by the police, than in a boat where you would not very likely be stopped. If the killer did choose to use either a boat or a vehicle, possibly, as I said before, he did so under cover of darkness or even mist, or in the murk of twilight before dawn or after dusk. Possibly he did it when it was duck season. That would be another thing to look for patterns. Did the murders correspond with duck hunting season? What's interesting, when I suggested the idea of reverse engineering the serial killings back to hunting, hunters scoffed at the idea, while others said something like, I'm a hunter and I've never ever used burlap. But you're probably not a duck hunter, because if you were, you'd know. And that is what we get from the Suffolk County District Attorney Ray Tierney. He said the victims were wrapped in a camouflage burlap. This is an important point. That is consistent with the kind used in duck blinds. And he said that this was obviously intended to conceal the bodies. Another reason Heuermann may have been interested in his mother's home was because of his extreme familiarity with the area surrounding it. It was a literal hunting ground for a young kid, for a youngster. You can imagine this is an area he felt really confident in and also comfortable in. And so how much of a leap is it from stalking and hunting beautiful distant ducks shimmering in the water to beautiful young women shimmering first in his imagination, then online, then in real life? According to Fox News, there's a strong chance that Heuermann, who grew up in Massapequa Park, hunted the area for years before and after he bought his childhood home from his mother in the 1990s. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.